Okay. And I'm not moving again. There we go. Okay, so in the volume analysis, they give you 3 ways to do your volume analysis. The design storm approach, continuous simulation. Has anybody heard continuous simulation before? Yeah, okay. All right, and what's called the water balance approach for certain SCMs. So we'll just quickly go through those. So your design storm approach is what we've all been doing, right? NOAA data, rainfall data. Okay. The change they've made now, though, is they want to start using the upper 90% confidence interval, which when you look at your NOAA sheets, the one in the bold one is the average, and then there's the range. So we have 3.2, and then below it says 295 to 354. So for the 2-year storm, you would be using that 3.54. You would be using that upper 90% confidence level. Okay. So you'd be looking at higher rainfall data for your 2-year storm. Okay. Again, they talk about this being used on less complex projects. This would be, again, the PCSM spreadsheet process that we're all familiar with. And again, with your post volumes less than or equal to your pre-development volumes. So that's, that's what we've all been doing with the wrinkle of a different rainfall amount. For capture and reuse, they have this little thing in here for sizing of capture and reuse facilities, that a tank designed to capture the 1.2-inch rainfall event with an additional storage volume provided that is equivalent to the NOAA 90% upper confidence interval 1-year 10-minute rainfall event can meet regulatory requirements. So if you have a capture and reuse type of BMPs, you could use this alternate method for sizing your facility, where you look at the, your 1.2-inch storm going to your facility plus this 1-year 10-minute rainfall event in order to size the facility. Okay. And then use that to meet the volume requirement for the contributing area to your system. So that's a little bit different. I have not calculated that out to see what it is relative to the other one. But again, this is a new wrinkle in the BMP manual. So continuous simulation is basically looking at actual data. Okay, rainfall data. So you would look at the closest rain gauge or within the same PennDOT region, and you would be looking at a minimum of 15 years of data. Okay. And then you would take that data and you would rank those events from low to high. Okay. And then basically taking that median value or the 50% exceedance value, and that then is the value that would be your 2-year 24-hour storm volume for calculating your volumes. Okay. So if you're in an area, if you're in an area that maybe has lower rainfall data, or it's showing lower rainfall data than NOAA, you have the option to go through this and get a different rainfall number. There's some computer programs, all the SWIMs kind of do this model, if anybody's familiar with these. And then Ricardia, I guess, is the outlier, the non-SWIM one. But these are some of the models that could be utilized to do this. So we can go buy more software and learn it. The water balance approach. This is a little different. Again, this is for the capture and reuse SCMs, where again, you look at that recent 15 years of data, and you basically take 90% of all the 1.2-inch rainfall events from the storms are removed, and then you take your post 2-year reduced to your 1-year pre-development. So again, this is a process that can be done through some of these computer models. And again, those are given there. SPA, USGS, EPA, SWIM can do this type of water balance approach, where it's looking at rainfall data versus ET versus transportation versus runoff. Okay. So again, this is an option available to you. So, on some of these more complex projects, it may be to your advantage. Again, you would have to look into this in more detail and based on where your site is and the rainfall data that's available to you, if this is an option for your project. The water quality approach is pretty much staying the same. You're going to have the PCSM spreadsheet, TSS, TPTN pollutant loads, again, reduced to those pre-development pollutant loads. So they're really not changing anything drastic with the water quality part. And again, with the MRCs, capture, reuse, treatment, wetlands, again, if you meet these design requirements, then the inflow volumes to those facilities would count towards your water quality targets and similarly to your volume as well. So those are just some of the brief highlights. Then there's some other things, peak rate. So we could talk a little bit about peak rate. Again, the design storm approach, but they also have a storm of record approach as well that you could use in your case. So the design storm approach, again, is our NOAA data, so in this case, you're just using anything above the 2-year storm. We're still just using the mean values at this point. We're just using that upper 90% for the 2-year storm. So this would be, again, the way we've been doing it in the past. The storm of record approach is where you kind of take and you look at the record of what's happened in your area and you select a storm that has occurred as your design storm for your design that's comparable or within the range of that NOAA data. So in this case, this is Southeast Pennsylvania. The top section is basically the median, lower, and upper values for each of the storms from NOAA. And then below is actual rainfall events that have occurred in that same area. Okay, and you could see then the numbers of when the storm happened, what the precipitation value was, and then you could use that number to represent your storm value. So you can see in this case, the 2-year storm event was 3.82 inches. The median is 328 and the upper is 358. So that's a storm that's relatively higher. Next one, 484 for the 10-year. And you could see that's kind of almost at the median. That's within the range again. 663 again is in the range. It's slightly lower than the median, but again, towards the lower end of the confidence interval. And then finally 8.02 inches. And again, that's within probably right about towards the upper ends, kind of in the 100-year storm. So again, in this case, it could be a scenario that benefits you. It could be a scenario where you might have a higher rainfall event than what you would get from NOAA. I believe it's the Pennsylvania State Climatologist is where they get these. Yes. And again, if you get into the BMP manual, the one thing of nice about the BMP manual is it's all set up with links so that if it references a section, there's a link to go back to that section. If it references something like this, there's a link to get to that section. So they've made it definitely more computer interactive for a lot of this stuff to make it easier for you to navigate around in the manual. So these are some of the other things that I noticed in the manual when I looked at it. So residential subdivisions, always, how much impervious should I figure for residential, right? That's always kind of the question. So they're saying include 110% of the projected impervious surface per lot to account for future impervious conditions. So basically add whatever they say they're going to build and add 10%. Okay, we've kind of recommended that along to always kind of take into account these sheds and pools and decks and other things that, obviously everybody wants to add later on. So again, they're saying here, add 10% to account for those areas or restrict further impervious through a deed restriction that's completed at the time of sale. So again, that's another option. And then provide that deed restriction as part of your notice of termination. Okay. Contractor qualifications. So there's a statement in here about the contractors. Constructing infiltration SEM should have at least 3 successful infiltration SEMs in the past 2 years. Okay. If the contractor can't demonstrate this experience, construction confirmation testing is required for each infiltration SCM. Okay. Qualifications should be verified by the owner and provided to DEP, the Conservation District, at the pre-construction meeting. Okay. One of the other things that's in here that's not on a slide is the requirement that prior to pre-construction meetings, we all know about the instruments that have to get filed 45 days after permit issuance. That the instrument should be filed prior and provided prior to the pre-construction meetings. Is there a question? No? Okay, I saw a hand, just stretching. Okay. And again, some of these things are in the BMP manual. I don't know if these are all going to get to the final, but again, these are some of the things that I noticed in my review. Soil testing. Construction testing for infiltration capacity is good engineering practice, or where the saturated conductivity is less than 0.57 inches per hour, upper range of C soils. Okay. C or D soils, 0.57 inches, basically testing. A full list of the conditions is necessary as provided in Appendix B, Table B8. So this is, again, the links. They've provided links to kind of bounce around in here. But confirmation testing basically for any C or D soils on sites to make sure that when they're constructed, they're still going to infiltrate. We've been requiring that on a lot of our projects just because it's good practice, and we pretty much want to know that the facilities function prior to processing the notice of termination. Volumes to wetlands. Okay, this is something we've been getting into recently. So a decrease in runoff to a sensitive natural feature as a wetland up to the 2-year storm can negatively impact. DEP may require an applicant to demonstrate that a reduction in flow to such features will not produce an adverse impact or otherwise require changes to avoid these impacts. Okay, an example is where an upstream BMP results in decreasing runoff entering a downstream natural wetland. So we're looking again at water balance here, trying to mimic the amount of water, not over infiltrate, not over detain flows, but try to match as close as possible to to what's happening in those wetlands. Headwater streams. Again, and they talk about doing the stream stability analysis, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second here, but it's saying here that if you're receiving surface water is less than a half a square mile as measured at the furthest POA. Okay, so your site has a headwater stream with a low drainage area of 300 acres. Then the total drainage area to any single POA should not exceed 10% of the contributing watershed. So again, if you're looking at a half a square mile, 300 acres, you should not have more than 30 acres to each to any one POA. If it exceeds 10%, the plan should attempt to establish multiple POAs, if feasible, to reduce the drainage area to the 10% threshold. So we're looking at this case where maybe you have a headwater stream and you're discharging a certain distance down from that headwater stream so that you're not, you're taking the water that used to go into the top of the headwater stream and you're essentially drying out the top of that headwater stream to try to evenly distribute the water into that headwater stream. So again, headwater streams, we talk about the project site is 10% or more of the stream watershed area. Okay. Stream stability analysis is generally necessary when the through an alternative design standard demonstration. Sites with less than 10% in which rate and volume requirements will be met are not anticipated to overburden the stream unless the stream is known to have existing pronounced bank erosion. Highly urbanized channels or flooding. However, DEP at its discretion may determine that any stream receiving discharge from earth needs further investigation and protection. And again, the way that this is basically taken care of is through a HEC-RAS analysis or something else that can look at a sediment transport analysis as well. Okay, so more emphasis on the type of stream, these headwater streams, that they're not getting degraded or their flows being too drastically reduced that could affect those headwater streams. Lakes and ponds, some people, they say, well, I have a lake or a pond on my site. That's basically my peak flow attenuation is through that lake. So again, in this case, the change of water surface elevations due to any regulated earth disturbance is limited to 6 inches of ponding depth for a maximum of 24 hours. So there may be the need for some kind of ponding analysis or pond analysis to show that those, that is that there's not going to, that you're going to meet that criteria. Wetlands, again, significant increases or decreases in volume can alter the hydraulic regime and function of a natural wetland and may prompt the need for a permit under 105 due to hydraulic alteration. So again, extreme changes in hydrology to wetlands could trigger some other requirements as well. And finally, we talked a little bit about EV wetlands anti-degradation. This gives a little more into that analysis in the BMP manual. So again, here are some of the things. Manage net change in volume. That's pretty standard stuff. Ensure there will be no significant change in runoff or infiltration characteristics that reduce flow volume during small storms. Again, that's looking at changes in hydrology, significant changes to wetlands. Temporary increases in ponding depth would not exceed 25% over the ponding depth of the 2-year to 100-year storms. Temporary increases of 50% and a minimum 50-foot of riparian buffer for thermal protection for the wetland, or demonstrate that thermal protection is involved. So this third bullet point here about the ponding depth. So how we kind of read that is that you would have to look at some kind of analysis of what is the watershed to that wetland point and what is your project's contribution into that, and kind of try to equate that into some type of ponding depth analysis, either, through area or something of that nature. So those are kind of the major items. Like I said, I have not looked into this thing in 100% detail, but we wanted to just kind of give you guys a flavor here today of some of the things that are in this manual. Like we said, this is still in the process of being developed. There still have to go through a lot of the comments, but at least to give you guys a first look at some of the things that are in the manual. So. Right. No, my understanding is it didn't change anything with critical stages. It's just saying that the contractor should know how to build these systems. Usually, some of the issues we have is just some of the contractors are inexperienced in what the best way to build these, especially if you get into some of the smaller projects. Paul. I would think that would be something that would probably just naturally start to get creative, just as part of our tracking system to know, who. Well, I think again, I mean, if as part of the, contractor qualification statements, this could be modified, maybe could be rolled into those kind of items where you can list projects where they were built. Again, it could be something similar to that. I would expect though, like you said, it just seems natural that we would end up having a database of who's building these things and maybe a plus or minus next to them. Yeah. And again, that could be something, again, some of the mechanisms of how this is going to be implemented probably haven't been fully developed yet. The first step is they have to actually get this manual through and published. And like we said, then we're going to have all kinds of training to go through. You'll get all kinds of PDHs then. Include. That's a good, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if everybody heard that, but that could be something we could take back that, maybe that's something that's incorporated into the co-permittee forms. That they provide that information. That's an option that we can, certainly pass along. Well, it's saying that you have to show a minimum 50-foot buffer for thermal protection or demonstrate that thermal protection is provided. So again, I mean, you have an if or, the premise is the 50-foot buffer is going to provide that thermal protection, I guess. And again, or show that you're meeting that. Any others? We have a PDF copy of the BMP manual. We'll put that on our site for you guys to be able to download and read at your pleasure. So stay tuned. We've heard about this for quite a while, but it seems like we're getting closer. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. So, okay. Thank you, everyone.
All right, I'm your last one of the day, so I'm gonna give a couple door prizes away and then we'll start. Another job site polo. We've got 531. 531. No, nobody. 279.
279.
Did they get their certifications yet?
I don't know if they got I don't know. I guess they didn't want their PDHs. Or they lost their ticket. Who lost their ticket? Come on, fess up.
338.
338. Oh, there's a gentleman in the back. No, he's sneaking out too. Oh, here comes the 338. All right. Everybody's hand will go up now.
Ernst C. 343.
You want to clear the table?
The Pike County Conservation District hoodie. 357. There we go. Nice cup from Conservation District 510. Oh, there you go.
Camo hat, let's do two.
All right. 297. Yeah, all right. And 527. 527. All right. Another job site t-shirt. 340. Lori, we ready back there? Okay.
All right, one more.
We'll do one more. Nice thermos from Lane, 529. I heard a yes.
All right.
What were you doing this place for?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we have a couple more for after the presentation. Thanks, Mike. So my name's Ellen Enslin. I'm the program manager at the Pike County Conservation District. I'm going to talk about notice of termination today. I'm a pinch hitter. I found out about a day or two ago that I was going to be doing this presentation, so I asked for a lot of so I asked for some grace here, and I will say that I'm going to be looking down at my notes quite a bit, especially near the end. So if there's going to be any questions, I'm going to ask for Mike and Drew and Mariana and Chris's help here. But I'm the last you got until we do more door prizes and get out of here. Maybe not. All right, we're going to go through what's a notice of termination and why it's important, the requirements of it, which I think most of the people in this room understand pretty good. Setting up your permit for termination, the PCSM operation and maintenance, recording, critical stage inspections, and then we're going to go through some unique NOT sites that we've dealt with in Monroe and Pike County. So the notice of termination is a regulatory requirement. It's 1027. It has to be submitted to the Conservation District or DEP regional office, depending on if you have a multi-county project. And it terminates your NPDS permit. That's what we're going to focus on mostly today. The regulation states that you would do this when your site is permanently stabilized, you have all your post-construction stormwater management BMPs in, and you have removed the ENS best management practices that are to be removed. So their permittee and the co-permittee are required to submit the notice of termination. It's also a permit condition in every NPDS permit. So when terminating a permit is a regulatory requirement, it's also in the best interest of the actual permittee, because failure to terminate the permit is actually a violation. So if you look at the inspection report, it might say failure to comply with permit conditions or failure to terminate permit, and that's actually because you were required to do the termination of the permit. So the permittee will remain responsible until the permit actually is terminated. And this will extend past any expiration date of the NPDS permit. So in the past, I mean, I've been doing this for about 20 years. In the past, these permits just kind of expired and then we kind of forgot about them. But now, because there's long-term operation and maintenance, there's critical stage inspections, the notice of termination holds a lot more bearing. It did back then too, but we're definitely getting more of them now. It's also important to terminate them because there can be changes in ownership or operation maintenance after the project is, maybe the permit expires. So if you don't terminate the permit, it could get more complicated the longer you let it drag out. So I'm sure most of you have heard that DEP has started to charge an annual fee now. It's a $500 fee. And this isn't unique to the stormwater construction permit. It's actually been something that's been pretty common in other DEP programs, and it's just kind of caught up to the NPDS stormwater permit now. So there's a $500 fee for every year until the permit termination is achieved, even if that permit expires. So your client might continue to get that $500 bill every year until they get this notice of termination in. So the best thing to do is finish your project early, terminate the permit, and then it's all done. They don't see that fee. So the form can be found on the DEP library. You can go into the ENS resource. That's the same place where Chris was referring to the MRC documents. There's also a frequently asked question document that can be used along with instructions. So those should be your first place to look. If you have questions, look at the instructions in the FAQ document. We just got word as this presentation was being put together that there are going to be some changes to the form, but it doesn't look like it's going to be substantial changes where things are going to dramatically change. So it's mostly just like a layout change. What you can see here are the main requirements of the NOT, and we're going to go through them in a little bit of detail. So this may be familiar to most of you. There's 3 appendices that really hold most of the information that we're looking for on the NOT. Appendix A is the summary table of all the installed best management practices. This is all the BMPs on the project site, their function, the total acreage, and the amount of volume of water treated. Appendix B is the record drawings checklist. So you have to have as-built if things have changed with that notice of termination. If nothing's changed over time during the course of that whole permit coverage, it might just be your PCSM drawings. You might not have to change and actually do as-built, but I would say that's pretty uncommon that nothing's changed over the project, especially with the more complicated ones. So when you fill out the checklist to show all the items that are included, you have the record drawings, building improvements, site utilities, stormwater conveyances, and the actual BMPs. So Appendix C is the table that lists all those BMPs, their location, and who's responsible. That's really what's going to be looked for down the road. It's encouraged to provide notice to lot purchasers, and a lot of this presentation is going to be focused on the individual lots. Like this seems like a lot of our issues that we have in notices of termination are with like your residential subdivisions, even your commercial subdivisions, those kind of things. So you'll see more of the examples are geared toward that later on, but it's encouraged to provide notice to lot purchasers and enter in agreements for the operation and maintenance as early as possible. So there's no surprises to those lot owners that they have something on their property that they're going to have to maintain. So Mike touched on this a little bit, but in addition to that O&M agreement, there's proof of recording at the recorder of deeds office within the 45 business days or 45 days of the permit issuance. And this is so something can be searched in a normal title search, telling that new owner that there's something on their property that they're going to have to maintain, or that it even exists on their property. You know, before this was in the requirements, there might be a rain garden on somebody's property or something on, you know, sometimes even trees on people's property. And they didn't realize that they're actually how the stormwater was being met. And, you know, that's where the pool would win, or that's where the deck would be built. And it still happens, but at least the person is aware if it's in their deed that there is something on their property, and they might ask a little more questions. So the recording at the recorder of deeds office has to happen 45 days from permit issuance, and you're supposed to have that to the district within 90 days. If some reason this is missed, or if there's been changes, a new recording would be needed, and proof would have to be provided along with that notice of termination. The slide here shows it's on the ENS resource page where you can find a sample instruction of that declaration of restrictions and covenants that can run with the land, mostly for residential lots is where it really is really important. So one thing we wanted to highlight was setting up your permit and your plans with the end in mind. Dealing with a lot of these notices of termination, complaint we often get is that there's a lot to record. There's a lot to give the individual lot owners when they do maybe sign off or get the individual lots when they're sold to them, because the way the plan is set up. So what we do encourage is to consider your plan sheet layout early on in the process. So try to put your, depending on the complexity of the project, try to put your best management practices and your operation and maintenance information on the same page, with the requirements really easily laid out in bullet form. Your narrative and your calculations don't need to be recorded. So the less pages that you do have to record, the better. So you typically advise, to separate out anything that doesn't need to be recorded, like your lighting plan, your PennDOT details, your ADA access information, and just keep on there the post-construction stormwater operating information and maintenance, and have it set up so you don't have to do the whole packet. Because it is quite costly depending on how big your project is. And we suggest that it be done early on, especially if you have a residential subdivision where lots are being sold off. So the individual landowners are aware that this is a requirement when they do buy the property. It's harder to explain to somebody that they have to have this best management practice on their property, building it and maintain it for the life, forever, if it's not in their deed like was intended. So again, set up your permit and your plan drawings for who would be responsible for the operation and maintenance going on. Just make it easier for the landowner to find and understand the requirements. So we're going to get into critical stage inspections. There's been a couple questions about this today. So the critical stage of construction inspections should be for the installation of your post-construction stormwater management best management practices. I'm going to forever call them BMPs. I'm not sure what the as SM. I shouldn't say anything. So this includes your underground treatment, your storage facilities, any kind of structural BMPs, and any other BMP that's appropriate, was approved on the plan. They will be identified on the plan drawings. They should be in your sequence of construction because that's sometimes they get missed. So it's better to put them in your sequence of construction. So it just goes right down as far as the contractor goes. And they definitely will be discussed at the pre-construction meeting. So it's important that the licensed professional or their designee be at the pre-construction meeting to discuss that. Getting into inspections. Your critical stage inspections should be performed or required to be performed by the licensed professional that is going to be signing the notice of termination or by their designee. Since they're so important, it's important that the designee be qualified to perform the inspections. We understand, sometimes just, go out there and take a picture, come back and let me know what you saw. But there's some of them that really should have, as much of a qualified person as possible doing the inspections to make sure, especially the underground ones, to make sure that they were installed properly, really to prevent any kind of future compliance issues. So even a perfect plan could go wrong if the plan is not implemented properly. So it provides an opportunity for the licensed professional to translate between the plan drawings and what the contractor is doing on the site. If it's a fairly new contractor, putting in stormwater best management practices, there should be something in the scope where the engineer can make sure that these, especially underground ones, are installed properly. It helps to prevent failing stormwater BMPs that can cause costly delays and potentially compliance issues where we'd be entering in like corrective action plans to fix something that's not working properly. In the end, someone needs to sign and seal the notices of termination. So it's a good idea to make written reports and take pictures of all your critical stage inspections. And I think Monroe County Conservation District requests is actually a note on the plan that a written report be done with photographs. And I'm not sure if that's submitted actually to your office as they go along or at the notice of termination stage. Okay. What wrong? Yeah, and I kind of see them as like the visual site inspection reports where, the contractor's doing those. These would be critical stage reports where there's pictures taken and an actual report of what's seen out on the site when these practices are going in. So we're going to go into difficult notice of termination sites. It's not uncommon for us to get surprised by new situations out there. So again, I would first look at your instructions, look at the plan, look at the frequently asked questions, see if everything was done properly. And then if when in doubt, contact the conservation district to see if there's any guidance that we can provide. One of the most common themes you'll see with some of these scenarios is that doing additional work up front to prepare the specific site for termination down the line will save you some time and energy in the future. Sometimes this isn't an option, like the first example I'm going to get into. So we've been seeing this a little bit more, especially we've got a lot in Pike County, we have a couple sites where there's residential subdivisions, individual lots that require a licensed professional to do an inspection of, say, an infiltration berm or a rain garden or such. So we actually are seeing a change in licensed professionals. So who did the original design is not the one that's doing the critical stage inspections. So if you're not the original, it may happen where you're not the original designer on the project, or you weren't even present for the critical stage inspections, but you end up getting involved at the notice of termination stage. So that's something you have to kind of vet out if you want to take on, obviously. If you weren't there doing it, and if you weren't doing the inspections at the beginning and their client is asking you to do the NOT, you got to kind of gauge that. Is that something you want to get involved in? But we're just going to go through what you could possibly do in that situation. So the image you see here is an image of a site in Pike County where there's an underground detention chamber. The top of the pipe in the image ended up being under existing pavement. Luckily, this site used the same licensed professional through the project. It was installed correctly, but it would be a difficult best management practice to verify if it was installed correctly if you weren't the original one out there doing the critical stage inspections. Obviously, if they're above ground, it's a lot easier. But for these underground infiltration systems or any underground system, there's a couple things you could do to try to see if it was installed correctly and maybe sign off on that NOT at that stage. So you can see if there was any kind of licensed professional inspecting the site during construction. There may be existing reports that exist. I know most contractors take pictures of everything, and if there wasn't a picture taken, you start to wonder why there wasn't a picture taken. Just for liability and insurance purposes, it seems like they take pictures of most days out on the site. There also could be municipal engineers that may have been inspecting the site as you move along that may have taken photographs. Outside of some type of report that you can find, there might be inspection reports to look into the system. There may be manhole size and can be investigated, or maybe you can insert a camera or do a down measurement from the inspection port. You can check adequate dewatering times and see if there's any blockages. If you can't verify anything in this manner, there might be an outlet you can inspect during and after a stormwater event. If there's no way to make sure that the best management practices was installed correctly and is functioning properly, it may need to be excavated. And that's going to be very costly for the client. However, you have to be comfortable signing off on that critical stage and signing off on the notice of termination to make sure it was functioning properly. To help prevent this from actually happening and to kind of set up the site, so if you're not the engineer at the end, it's all set up for you, or maybe another one. You can add inspection methods for your best management practices in your design and on the plans. So actually call out what should be done at each critical stage for inspections for the engineer. And considering actually putting in there the requirement to provide a report with pictures to the applicant and to the conservation district. There are actually proposed changes in the manual, like there's a lot of proposed changes in the manual, like Mike was saying, but one of them is something similar to this to kind of do those reports during the critical stage inspections. But since it's still in draft form, we'll see if that, once the comments are all in the comment response document is done, see if that stands. So another thing we deal with is these large commercial sites, and they're becoming more and more prevalent in the Northeast region. And for these, there's a couple special considerations to look at when you're doing the design and to talk to your client about. Who will be responsible for ownership? There's many of these where there's lease agreements that are going to complicate the operation and maintenance. There's sites where, the storefronts are leased, but one basin is leased to this company, another one's leased to this company. These larger commercial sites tend to get complicated with the operation and maintenance agreements. Another thing that might change is the site layout over time. So just to make sure that all amendments that might affect the plan are reflected in the as-built drawings. and the instrument that's recorded at the Recorder of Deeds office has been updated. These sites utilize subsurface detention systems, so followed the design recommendations to address what could happen. For example, the previous example, if you have an underground detention system, you want to put that in, like I said, in the plan drawings. One thing that we may do as inspectors, if we do get a notice of termination, is to look at the site during a rain event and to make sure the water, these large commercial sites, it's really easy during the paving for things not to go where they're supposed to go. If there's a real slight change in grade, sometimes the water doesn't go to the inlet it's supposed to go to. So that's something that districts may go out there doing rain events to make sure the water's going where it's supposed to. So that might be something you want to do before you sign off on the notice of termination. Is there any questions on those? I kind of jumping around. Mike? Right. You should think that a professional should sign off on the co-permittee. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would suggest, I mean, I don't think that's a bad suggestion. I would also say that, to educate the client, to make sure that they're aware of how important these critical stage inspections could be and how costly it could be if they do sign the contract and release funds, before that's done. I mean, I'm always a strong believer in if you want to make a change to these forms and to this protocol, that you actually put it in writing and send it to DEP. So I would suggest doing that. Okay. Yeah, I kind of think of it as like sometimes it's a big ship and it kind of takes a little bit to turn, but it's something that I've seen. And unfortunately, I guess we have to just deal with the ramifications if that is an issue down the road. That's pretty much, that's all I can suggest, Mike. It's just education. It's something, we can talk about during our pre-construction meetings as well. And stress on that at the pre-construction meeting while we're out there, that things shouldn't be signed off on until it's appropriate. Any other questions on those examples? Sorry, I'm reading a lot. This is the meat and potato part of it, I guess. So changes in ownership. Sometimes the property that's being developed ends up being sold without the new landowner signing on to the NPDES permit as a co-permittee. So this is something we've seen occur with residential lots, but it's happened with commercial development as well. An example is where a commercial business is developed and then sold to somebody out of the area as an investment, or a company out of the area as an investment, without the engineer even knowing. So there may be conditions of the permit prohibiting the sale of the property without first transferring the NPDES permit or signing the new owner on the co-permittee. So the example, this is in the general NPDES permit, but here's an example of the permit condition that requires the transfer of the property to be transferring the permit as well within a certain time period. No question, Mike? Oh, okay. So there's two main issues in this scenario would be who is responsible for the operation and maintenance, and potentially the site being in violation. Like, I think that's what Mike's talking about. So most likely the new owner will be responsible for the maintenance, but they might be unaware of any of the requirements if they purchase the property without seeing the NPDES permit, or potentially even the plans or the operation and maintenance. So it's good to ensure the landowner agrees to the operation and maintenance conditions. If the new landowner won't agree to this, the original permittee is still on the permit and the permit can't be transferred. The notice of termination would not be acknowledged without some type of agreement in this scenario.
Buildings have been bought by other companies. That requires a transfer. If you get transfer before you terminate, you gotta give it to the right person.
Right.
So like we have one where there was four times, four name changes later, before it's submitted the end. So they have to provide to us that change of how company A became company B, became company C, became company C. So that we have a path where we can say, okay, the company B officer, can sign this thing on behalf of the company A officer. So there's some legal things that come into play here, but if there's no changes or selling or the company, a lot of times these companies then get involved.
Yeah, that's another big thing.
That's where the transfer form is called. If you get the permit transfer to the proper entity, then we can terminate the permit once it's in the property.
Yeah, and I mean, that should be happening anyway because of that annual fee as well, that making sure and that the fee, the inspection reports, everything's going to the proper entity. So anytime there's a name change, the district and the DEP should be notified of that. So the second scenario is if the site is in violation due to the property sale, if the site is in violation due to the property sale, assuming the rest of the site is in compliance and the operation and maintenance situation is solved, the transfer can be submitted. A transfer can be processed in conjunction with the notice of termination, but there is some coordination that has to happen because the transfer would go to DEP and the notice of termination goes to the district. There's different timeframes. So if you're getting to that point near the end of the project, the best thing is to contact us and we'll walk you through it. If the property owner will not participate in the termination or the transfer, the site will remain in violation until a solution is achieved. So we do the best to try to work through these, but big thing is to get the permit transferred and then get the NOT in and processed. So like Mike was talking about these, what we call legacy permits, or if you remember this old form, the old NOI or application, the older permits have continuously been renewed or have expired. They have their own unique challenges for termination. Many conservation districts have been pursuing permit termination. So you may hear a lot more talk about these NOTs because we're being asked to close them out because of the $500 and trying to find people after all these years and find good addresses. So it's best, a lot of applicants or permittees have actually been initiating notices of termination because they don't want to pay that $500 fee. It's not much, but it's enough to get people asking questions. So these can get complicated as these scenarios may be combined with other unique scenarios, such as change in licensed professional who puts the NOT together, changes in ownership, as Mike was saying, changes in companies. So you should really just talk to the conservation district to get those resolved. Another reason to get permits terminated is because development in areas previously developed under an NPDES permit may be still considered part of the common plan of development or sale. And we see this happening with older permitted sites where landowner notices weren't provided. And the original permittee would still be responsible for issues that may arise if the permit was never terminated. So it's in the best interest of everybody to kind of just clean these up and get them off the NPDES route. Well, so this is a picture from Pike County of an unforeseen failure of a BMP and actually turned into an MRC, like Chris talked about. So infiltration BMPs, especially in Pike, may not work properly, even if they've been designed and implemented properly. So one thing we run into a lot in Pike, and I'm sure in Monroe, is groundwater that comes up when we don't expect it. Once you start digging, or maybe it comes from off site where you didn't expect it. And now groundwater is happening and going into your basin. Or it could be something that happens in the field where soil is compacted in an infiltration area or sediment gets to an infiltration area and it's just not working properly. Regardless of what happens, some of the best management practices are not dewatering in their timeframes, and there's a reduction or loss in design specs. So the site ends up violation and the permit can't be terminated. So early on in the process, proper site investigation, geotech, to give the best possible design is important, along with talking at the pre-construction meeting to hash out any potential issues. Proper critical stage inspections during construction will help prevent these as well, but sometimes everything doesn't work. So if there's any unforeseen circumstances that leads to the failure, it's best to contact the district and DEP ahead of time, so it doesn't end up potentially coming a violation. We just go out there and do a site inspection report. So there's different things that can be done to fix the problem, which we discussed some of those today. There could be permit amendments or corrective actions that might happen. And it's best to do this early on as opposed to when we get to the notice of termination and we're going out there and really looking at the PCSM BMPs. Depending on inspection schedules and what's going on, the PCSM BMPs from the district standpoint, we're going to give a really good look at it, as we're getting closer to the NOT. And if there's issues that could have been resolved really early on, if they had just been brought up, it's better to do that then than to wait till we're looking at the NOT. And now we're looking at potentially, you got 3 more months on your permit. Did we make you renew the permit? Is it a corrective action plan, which is something that would maybe something that's not done in the future. So it's really important to look at those BMPs if they're failing and get them resolved before you get to the stage of the NOT. That's before the MRC was put in. So residential subdivisions. At times, like I've mentioned, they can be challenging for permit termination. Oftentimes, it'd be a little easier if entire subdivisions were built out with the approved ENS BMP plans, but this is often not the case. As with all projects, we're going to emphasize early planning with the notice of terminations, and some early considerations to discuss at pre-application meetings are: what point is your applicant actually selling those lots? If the permit is complete and terminated before any houses are sold, this would be easy. They're constructed, but they're just not sold. This would be the easiest, but how often does that happen? Who's going to be responsible for the operation and maintenance? That's really determined by your site design. If you have a lot of on-lot stormwater, it's going to be a lot more individual landowners that you're going to have to educate and have responsible for your O&M. Who will hold the permit for the life of the project? This is, we're running into this a lot in Pike County. The original developer might not want to maintain responsibility for the project. Maybe they put the roads in, the utilities, and then they sell individual lots off. There might be a homeowners association that might pick up that permit, but if no one maintains the permit and the permit expires, then there's a potential that each individual lot owner would have to obtain their own NPDS permit. So, there might be one builder doing all the work, or there might be individual lot owners who choose whoever they want to build the lots. So it gets a little bit complicated as far as informing individual lot owners, and it's easier if the recording is done, it's in the deed, they get the deed, they know the BMPs have to be constructed, they know there's critical stage requirements, they can kind of budget that when they're building the house, that there might have to be an engineer out there. It's good for them to know ahead of time if there's going to be these requirements. One thing that was mentioned, like I said, and Mike said in the new manual, is the additional impervious. We're seeing also where the impervious was set and there was no accommodations for additional impervious for decks, driveways, other features. And this might complicate things when you get to that notice of termination stage and some of that water hasn't been managed. So one scenario we're going to look at is where the developer of the subdivision is building the house, selling them, whether they're spec houses or any kind of unique design. It makes the most sense for the developer to maintain the permit here and have any contractors be the co-permittees. The overall control is held by one entity, and the operation and maintenance during and after permit coverage is is identified. However, it's unlikely the developer will want to have involvement after the lots are sold. So those landowner notices that we talked about are extremely important. There might be other entities that are willing to sign on to that, like your homeowners association, and do some kind of operation and maintenance for those common best management practices. Another scenario is where the developer only builds the roads and nothing else prior to selling. So this would be similar to like a utilities or community spaces, or so we see this occur where the developer packages deals maybe to another developer or sells off those individual lots. Really, it's the most important thing is to know who's responsible for the permit as it goes down the line. It's a good idea potentially, depending on, I mean, how your site lays out, but to push some of your stormwater into areas that are separate from the individual lots that may simplify the operation and maintenance later on. As I mentioned, the original permittee will be responsible during the process, even if they're not doing the construction on each individual lot. So there might be the developer having the overall permit and selling those individual lots to homeowners or future homeowners. And then there's new contractors on there that have to put in the BMPs. It just kind of trickles down and gets more and more complicated as it goes along, but it's just the kind of the nature of it. So it's just, like I said, it's really important to make sure that each landowner knows what they have to do. One thing you can do to clean it up a little bit is to have individual lots terminate as you go along, potentially with a partial NOT, or at a minimum, get the landowner notices when each lot is done, and then they can be terminated altogether at the end of the project. So what we see is these individual best management practices. Like I said, it's important for landowners within subdivisions to sign on as co-permittees and sign on to the permit and understand their responsibilities. And this is where it's important to talk about usable space in the property, talk about with landowners that they can't remove things, it's in their deed. And if you don't do this ahead of time, it might be struggle to get that notice of termination because things have been removed maybe in the 4 years that it's taken from the first lot going in till the end. So we're going to get into off-lot best management practices. So if the property owner or the developer makes a choice to sacrifice some of the lots for installing these larger best management practices, the NOT process may be simpler. The key here is to make sure there's an entity in place to do the operation and maintenance after the developer terminates the permit. It's a great option, but there still needs to be an entity that maintains the roads, and potentially that could be the homeowners association, or, you know, sometimes it could still be the developer. So what if the development doesn't finish before the permit expires? So permit expiration doesn't mean expiration of the permit conditions. If the permit expires and there's work still happening on the site or planned to be on the site would be in violation. If it's the only violation and all the impervious added to the site is being treated. So basically, if the only issue is that the permit's expired without the NOT, that's something we can take care of and actually have the NOT done after the fact. If there's still work to be done, then potentially a new permit would have to be applied for and obtained. So if there's still remaining work to do in the subdivision or any other development that's part of a common plan of development or sale, the new developers, like I said, or lot owners would have to obtain their own permit coverage. So it's important to renew the permit if all work is not completed, or if it is completed, to terminate the permit. So that's the end of it. Just want to reiterate that we're trying to have you set up the site plan for the end in mind. make sure you're doing your critical stage inspections and to look at the guidance documents for the notice of termination, the frequently asked questions and the instructions. So. Any questions? Good. Right. So the question is, are they back charging permits that? You mean that haven't submitted the notice of termination? I'm not sure I understand the question. That's. So he's asking, who does the like a new application, like, so if you just got your permit yesterday? Right. Oh, no, they are getting charged that $500 fee. Yeah. Yeah, no, it wasn't like a date. It was all open NPDS permits that didn't have a notice of termination. There, we had to put together a list and everything. Good. Right. That's a Mike question. The question is, how do you verify street sweeping?
Things like street sweeping, inlet filters,
Mhm.
something that requires some kind of periodic maintenance to function. We specifically have notes to the plan that that's required. We're trying to reiterate that in our letters as well, that, you can come out there and say, show us, what you're doing. I just had a similar one where they went to terminate the permit. And you couldn't even see the bottom of the inlet filter. The inlet filters were ripped apart, bags were torn up. It was obvious they didn't do it all well. The street sweeping is kind of the same thing. We were told there and say, do you have any kind of, do you have receipts? Do you have some kind of written documentation that you're actually doing this? Well, then we wouldn't terminate the permit. We would at least tell them, go get it.
Yeah, give us one. Yeah.
I mean, we'll try to get.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I think the only other thing I would add is, when you get to the NOC phase, if there's anybody responsible for a BMP other than the permit,
Right.
should have some kind of landowner notice for them. So where that comes into play is, you could have a subdivision that has private roads, and the HOA is going to be responsible for the vegetated swales along the road that you're claiming, and maybe the detention base. Okay, so really, we should have something from the HOA, but the HOA has to put on notice of what their requirements are for those facilities. That's why it gets very complicated in residential, because you have all of those things and you have to keep track. So we always tell everybody, get the report, get them to us as you get them, and we can get that. And I'm getting that.
Thank you.
It is technically my county. Thank you all for coming today. We just want to wrap everything up here. I know that we've gone a little bit past our time. I'm sorry for that. If you don't know me, I'm Christina Heaney. I'm the district manager of the Monroe County Conservation District, the Copwriter. I just want to say thank you to everyone that was involved in putting this together. Thank you, Lori Kerrigan, for all your work in setting this up. And thank you guys for attending. It's very encouraging to us to see this many people come out and continue your education and try to work on coordinating and communicating better. So thank you so much and hope to hear from you guys soon.
Yep. I'm Michelle Long. I'm the executive director for the Pike County Conservation District. Let's give a round of applause to our lovely staff. who did a great job today. Also, the reason you're all here, your PDH certificates are on the table out there in alphabetical order. Good luck finding that. And
Is on the. Yeah.
And you also, if you can fill out the, on the agenda, there's a QR code for a survey to give us your input on future topics and how everything went today. Please be kind and tip your bartender on the way out. Thank you.
All right. You're not even gonna say you're never coming back?
Oh, no,
No, no. You don't want them to glad hand you.
No, I don't want to.
All right. Okay, what do we want to do with these? Oh, I'm spinning. Let me turn this off before I start talking. Oh, no, turn it off. Whatever.
What are you doing with all those shirts? You're all gonna give me. Yeah.